I'm going to show you game 11 from the World Championship match between Jose Raul Capablanca and Manuel Lasker, played in Havana in 1921, 100 years ago, give or take a few days. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Let's get to 100,000 subscribers. Do click the button down there and do consider supporting us via PayPal or Patreon, links down there. Check out the rewards on Patreon. So here we go, game 11. Well, the first 4 games of the match were drawn. Capablanca had won game 5. Then there were 4 more draws. And then Capablanca had won this incredible positional masterpiece in game 10. Do check out those videos if you haven't seen them already. So after 10 games, Capablanca is 2 up, 2 wins to the good. The match winner would be the first to 6 wins. Or if there were, after 24 games, no one had got to 6 wins, then, well, whoever was leading at that point would be declared the winner. So effectively it was a 24-game match. So, game 11, let's see what happened. Capablanca with the white pieces, and it's another Queen's Gambit. I will go back at the end of the game to look at some more of the theory. Once again, it's an interesting line, an interesting little sub-variation of this classical variation of the Queen's Gambit. So this is one of the starting positions of the main line of the orthodox variation of the Queen's Gambit. White playing rook c1, waiting to develop that bishop because black often wants to take and then play with a6 and b5 and c5, but doesn't want to play the bishop here straight away because somehow white will lose the so-called battle of the tempo. So white plays a useful move, rook c1 first, and then hoping that black will take on c4. a6, a popular move, very good idea. Wanting to take and then play b5, that's one of the main lines. c6 was favoured by Capablanca himself. Lasker played here rook e8. So a slightly unusual move, but actually there's logic to the move. Again, it's a kind of waiting move actually. The rook move could be useful if, for example, white exchanges here, then the rook stands perfectly on the semi-open file. But again, it's about the battle of the tempo. Basically, black is waiting for white to play bishop d3, and then you'll exchange on c4. Queen c2, so Kappa waits again. Queen c2, c6. So it's very similar to a lot of the other lines. There are just slight differences with that rook already on e8. Bishop d3, finally the bishop is developed and Lasker exchanges straight away. And then plays knight d5. Exchanging off these bishops is usually desirable for black, because it just gives black a little bit more room to move. So bishop takes bishop, and white can't really avoid that. You can drop the bishop back here and get this. Well, the structure is damaged, but it's still playable for white. That is an option. Famous Alikin game went like that. Anyway, not in that exact position, but anyway. Bishop takes bishop, the normal move. Why not? And here Lasker recaptured with the rook. Of course, queen takes is somehow a much more harmonious looking move. I'll look at that at the end of the game, but rook e7, it feels a little bit clumsy, but actually Lasker has a particular idea in mind, and it's perhaps not that bad. Castles, of course, normal, and now knight f8. So Lasker is manoeuvring behind the first 3 ranks Looks a little bit passive. And, you know, it's hard for black to hit out against white's lovely centre. But let's see what Lasker has in mind. Bishop d7. This looks just, yeah, really, really passive. But actually, black has quite a strong shell of a position, and it's not that bad. Rook c8. So very often in these kind of positions, black needs to break out with either c5 or e5. And therefore b4 from Capablanca looks absolutely normal here to make sure that black is not going to be able to play c5. In which case, you know, black looks to have a pretty horrible position, so cramped, you know, playing behind those first three ranks. But as I said, it's maybe not that bad. Bishop e8 from Lasker. And Capablanca writes here, the defensive position is Steinitzian in its character, with most of the pieces massed on the last rows. There are no weak points in black's game, but his position suffers from lack of space for his pieces to manoeuvre. So that's Capablanca talking. So yes, interesting that he describes it as Steinitzian, and there were a few famous games that Steinitz played. I mean, notably in the Spanish, actually, where he had his pieces, you know, right on the back rank, but actually withstood the pressure and broke out. This manoeuvre, bishop d7 to e8, is quite common in the Queen's Gambit, and sometimes in the Catalan as well. Looks passive, but there's more to it, actually, than meets the eye. So here we can see why Lasker played the rook, or recaptured with the rook. He played the rook to c7. So he's starting to get a little bit of coordination. But actually, I think the move that black should play here is pawn to f6. I mean, I've carried out this kind of manoeuvre myself in Catalan and Queen's Gambit positions. So this bishop will actually tuck itself either on f7, or sometimes it can shoot out to h5, and that pin's a little bit annoying for white. And having played bishop f7, then sometimes you can go for this break e5. Got to be careful with that rook there. You know, maybe you play the queen to e8 first. It looks very involved, but if you get in e5, then actually things aren't that bad. You know, that is an option. So f6 I rather like, and of course, you know, I would prefer to play white every time here, but it's not that bad. But after rook c7, black doesn't have time to free that bishop, to give the bishop a window. White's initiative on the queen side is, well, a little bit pressing, let's put it like that. And certainly, you know, white has the better game in this position. And here Kappa plays what, to my eyes, is a very natural move. Well, he mentioned earlier, well, there are no weaknesses in black's position. Well, there is. There is a big hole on d6, actually, which he now exploited. e5 with the idea knight e4 into d6. It looks absolutely wonderful for white. b6, so Lasker is trying to fight back a little bit, but at the moment it certainly isn't possible to play c5. That'll be exchanged off, and, well, you know, b5 then. Rook b8 just avoids the knight coming in. Queen c3, and this was criticised afterwards by a few players. I should mention that some of the notes I'm giving are taken from My Great Predecessors by Kasparov, where he annotates this game. Or, yeah, someone annotates these games, but okay, let's say it was Gaza. Anyway, Queen a3 recommended instead. Just tucking the queen out of the way. That's where it ends up anyway. On c3 it's slightly vulnerable to a knight coming in here. a3 would have been a better square, but in any case, white is better here. And of course, knight d6, and that is truly an octopus knight. I should have my octopus knight mug and t-shirt and all the rest of it. What a fantastic piece. You can see it really dominates black's major pieces, actually. Knight d5, yeah, and now the queen has to go to a3, so it would have been better to move there straight away. Now black needs to fight back. If black remains passive, then there is absolutely no hope. So here's where Lasker starts to fight back. f6. So that bishop finally gets a window on the world and starts the process perhaps of undermining the knight here. And now an interesting decision. Capa decides to exchange off that bishop on the back rank, which might seem counterintuitive, but actually if that bishop is going to come out to h5, attacking the knight, which supports that pawn on e5, then you can see how that knight quite quickly could be undermined. But in exchanging off that bishop actually protects some important squares, namely these squares here. So Capablanca basically changes strategy and starts to open the position. Now if knight takes, then knight e5 looks very nice for white. That the e pawn and c pawn are rather weak. So pawn takes pawn, which means these squares are covered, but the king is now somewhat exposed. But I suppose you could say black has gained some freedom, and that knight at least stands on a decent square. Now Capa played an interesting move, a move that kind of clarifies the position. Kasparov recommends bishop c4, which I have to say I like very much, looks very natural. And then one's going to play rook e1 and start to build pressure here. But Capa just played b5, and he said afterwards that he was very proud of this move. He felt this was necessary. And well, one thing is it does give the queen access here. So for example, if pawn takes pawn, then after this exchange, white is certainly doing very, very well here. Rook c6, the pressure is too much for black. So Lasker had to play here. And now all these exchanges, you might think that sort of rather lifts some of the pressure from black's position. Well, it does just to a certain extent. But it also clarifies the situation, so there is more access into black's position here. The king in that sense is more exposed because lines have opened up on the queen side, and there are also moves like this as well. Whoops, misfired again. Bishop's sometimes coming to b5. And now, having cleared the queen side, Capablanca basically switches his attention to attacking black's king. So rook e1. Queen c8, so there's potential counterplay here. Certainly if black could exchange off rooks at some moment, that would ease the defence, but not easy to achieve that. White's piece is looking good here. The only piece which isn't really playing its part in the attack, or potential attack, is the knight on f3. So knight d2. Swinging around into e4, and that does look like a much better square. So knight f8, knight e4, looking at some very sensitive points in the position. Now, here it's possible that f5 is going to come, driving the knight away. And that's why Capablanca played his next move, which I like very much, pawn to h4. So it means that if f5, we can give a check and knight g5, or knight g5 straight away, but it seems clearest to do that. And this is really nice. The queen coming in here, and yeah, you can see that f5 has just weakened black's position. So rook c7 covers the second rank, or the seventh rank, depending on which way you're looking at it. And now, well, I think Capa's next move is somehow so typical of his style. Such a calm move. How do you play here with white? Let me have a little slurp of tea from my lovely Queen in Siberia mug. You can see that. Which might give you a little clue as to Capa's next move. Queen b3, very calm, a little creeping move. Queen looks at the b6 pawn, which is obviously isolated and potentially weak, but also prepares to play bishop c4, just increasing the pressure on d5 and through the knight into e6 as well. Very nice move, very calm. Rook g7, g3, well, you can see the difference between the two kings. White's king has these pawns in front of it, black's king somewhat exposed. Rook a7, bishop c4, very hard for black to gain any counterplay here. And now tactics start to come into play. If h6, I'm sure you've spotted the tactic. White exchanges everything on d5 and takes on f6. So after bishop c4, Lasker had to play rook a5 to protect the d5 knight. And now again another very simple move from Capa, so typical of his style. Nothing flash, just absolutely sound. Knight c3, increasing the pressure here. Black has to exchange, and having got rid of that knight, then white now can increase the pressure on the e6 pawn. King f7, right, now next job to switch the queen over to the king side. More pressure here, and potentially the queen coming in there. Queen d6, queen e4, nice move. Looking at h7, looking down here as well. Rook a4 played. I think it's already a very difficult position. Some commentators recommended rook a7 as a better move, but then d5 looks very strong. And just opening things up. Queen g4, potentially coming in here. And bishop d3 as well. This is not a nice position for black. So rook a4 played. Queen b7 check. King g6. As Kasparov points out, h5 check would be the best move here. This didn't happen. Let me just show you this very quickly. If king takes, then queen g7, and that's going to be mate soon. So king h6, queen f7, bishop d3, and rook takes e6. So this is very Kasparovian, a Kasparovian way to finish the game. Finding some tactics to bust through to black's king, involving some calculation. Obviously, if rook takes bishop, then rook takes pawn check. And if knight takes, well, let's go to the end here, and queen g6 mate. Now here's what Kasparov had to say about this. I will come on to the actual game continuation, but Kasparov said, it would not have been so difficult for Capablanca to work out the combination, but again, what told was his play on general grounds. In Havana 1921, this had no significance. His minor flaws went unnoticed because Lasker did not exploit them. Before Alekhine, no one could force Capa to really work, and the latter was accustomed to winning with little effort. However, in Buenos Aires 1927, this habit was to cost the Cuban dearly. So that was Kasparov in his book, My Great Predecessors. Now that is, I think, a very telling comment from Kasparov. Yes, a little foreshadowing of the World Championship match against Alekhine in 1927. So yeah, basically Capa is just creeping his way in and didn't bother to calculate a forced finish. But Kappa's method was pretty good. And this is how the game ended. Rook c7. The rook came in. Rook check. Queen d6. And now, yeah, there's a boom finish. If you want to say boom, let's say boom. Boom! Queen takes knight. And that's the end of the game here. Lasker resigned. Well, one move from mate. Queen takes and rook takes pawn. Checkmate. Yeah. Very interesting. Lasker said after, or wrote afterwards, this game shows Capablanca's style in its most favourable light. Energetic but cautious play, striving to create a sound position from which it is easy to launch an attack. Slight contradiction there. Energetic but cautious. Interesting. But anyway, I think it is a game that is very typical of Capablanca's style, or that style that we always imagine that Kappa always played in. He was actually could play in different ways as well. But yeah, wonderful game. So that was his third win in the match. There was still some way to go, and I will be showing you a couple more games from this World Championship match. Let's just go back to the theory. So, as I said, this move rook e8, a little bit unusual, but maybe not so bad. Nigel Short used this actually in his candidates match against Gelfand in Brussels 1991. So in this position, Gelfand actually just played bishop d3, but Nigel got a very reasonable position in typical Queen's Gambit fashion, just by playing a6 and then, well, trying to play b5. It's reasonable for black. But this is also fine. So here we're obviously following the Kappa-Lasker game. And here, for example, well, Kappa played bishop d3, but one could continue this battle of the tempo with a3. So we're following a game Gurevich Lyoki, France 2003, that went like this. And black breaks in this typical way, and that is absolutely fine for black. We've seen that many times in the Queen's Gambit. Nice arrangement of pieces. So continuing the Kappa-Lasker game, and here knight d5 played. Previously in St. Petersburg 1914, Kappa had actually played b5 against Rubinstein, but got a pretty miserable position. Here is where it goes wrong actually, and well, Kappa was a pawn down. It's not a good position. And in the game, yes, in this position, instead of rook takes, queen takes is a more sensible move. And here, you can just do this. E5 is possible, but actually I quite like b6 as well, just to play the bishop to b7. Black's position is not bad. It's kind of strategy that Kappa himself used to play actually in Queen's Gambit positions in the orthodox variation. And you go for c5. It's not bad for black at all. So there we go. Yet another variation in the orthodox Queen's Gambit, rook e8. Thanks for watching. More games from the match coming soon.